These are felony crimes in New York State, no matter who you are. We cannot and will not normalize serious criminal conduct. The defendant repeatedly made false statements on New York business records. He also caused others to make false statements. The defendant claimed that he was paying Michael Cohen for legal services performed in 2017. This simply was not true. And it was a false statement that the defendant made month after month in 2017. April, May, June, and so on through the rest of the year. For 9 straight months, the defendant held documents in his hand containing this key lie, that he was paying Michael Cohen for legal services performed in 2017. And he personally signed checks for payments to Michael Cohen for each of these 9 months. In total, the grand jury found there were 34 documents with this critical false statement. Why did Donald Trump repeatedly make these false statements? The evidence will show that he did so to cover up crimes relating to the 2016 election. Donald Trump, executives at the publishing company American Media Incorporated, Mr. Cohen, and others agreed in 2015 to a catch and kill scheme. That is, a scheme to buy and suppress negative information to help Mr. Trump's chance of winning the election. As part of this scheme, Donald Trump and others made 3 payments to people who claimed to have negative information about Mr. Trump. To make these payments, they set up shell companies, and they made yet more false statements, including, for example, in AMI, American Media Incorporated's business records. One of the 3 people that they paid to keep quiet was a woman named Stormy Daniels. Less than 2 weeks before the presidential election, Michael Cohen wired $130,000 to Stormy Daniels' lawyer. That payment was to hide damaging information from the voting public. The participant scheme was illegal. The scheme violated New York election law, which makes it a crime to conspire to promote a candidacy by unlawful means. The $130,000 wire payment exceeded the federal campaign contribution cap, and the false statements in AMI's books violated New York law. That is why Mr. Trump made false statements about his payments to Mr. Cohen. He could not simply say that the payments were a reimbursement for Mr. Cohen's payments to Stormy Daniels. To do so, to make that true statement, would have been to admit a crime. So instead, Mr. Trump said that he was paying Mr. Cohen for fictitious legal services in 2017 to cover up actual crime committed the prior year. And in order to get Michael Cohen his money back, they planned one last false statement. In order to complete the scheme, they planned to mischaracterize the repayments to Mr. Cohen as income to the New York State tax authorities. The conduct I just described and that which was charged by the grand jury is felony criminal conduct in New York State. True and accurate business records are important everywhere, to be sure. They are all the more important in Manhattan, the financial center of the world. That is why we have a history in the Manhattan DA's office of vigorously enforcing white-collar crime. My office, including the talented prosecutors you saw at arraignment earlier today, has charged hundreds of felony falsifying business records. This charge, it can be said, is the bread and butter of our white-collar work. And fraud presents itself in all different forms here in Manhattan. We've charged falsifying business records for those who violated federal bank secrecy laws. We have charged falsifying business records for those who were seeking to cover up sex crimes. And we have brought this charge for those who committed tax violations. At its core, this case today is one with allegations like so many of our white-collar cases. Allegations that someone lied again and again to protect their interests and evade the laws to which we are all held accountable. As this office has done time and time again, we today uphold our solemn responsibility to ensure that everyone stands equal before the law. No amount of money and no amount of power changes that enduring American principle. I'll now take questions.
Right. Excuse me. So we're going to take a limited number of follow-up questions, one question per reporter. I will call on you. And again, we have limited time. Thank you. The first question will be Brett.
Thank you. Richard Russell-Skinner. Why now? I mean, some argue that this is a political move. You're not going to be a political person. The floodgates are going to go into the next, political season. Why now?
We conducted a thorough and rigorous investigation, as we're known to do, at the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. I've been doing this for 24 years and am no stranger to rigorous, complex investigations. I bring cases when they're ready. Having now conducted a rigorous, thorough investigation, the case was ready to be brought, and it was brought.
Thank you. Mr. Bragg, the indictment says that there were 34 false business records. And they were done to conceal another crime, but the indictment does not specifically say what those crimes were. We are assuming, perhaps, that they might be election-related. I'm wondering if you can specify what laws were also broken.
Right. So let me say as an initial matter that the indictment doesn't specify that because the law does not so require. In my remarks, I mentioned a couple of laws, which I will highlight again now. The first is New York State election law, which makes it a crime to conspire to promote a candidacy by unlawful means. I further indicated a number of unlawful means, including more additional false statements, including statements that were planned to be made to tax authorities. I also noted the federal election law cap on contribution limits.
But why weren't there those crimes charged? Why wasn't he charged with those crimes?
Well, I'm not going to go into our deliberative process on what was brought. The charges that were brought were the ones that were brought. The evidence in the law is the basis for those decisions.
You had expressed a year ago that you had some reservations about the case's readiness. Can you talk to us about what were some of the questions in your mind that needed to be answered in order to bring a case of this magnitude?
I'm not going to go chapter and verse into any thinking. What I will say is, I believe the time period you're talking about, I've been in office for a couple of months. The investigation, in my view, was not concluded into the conduct in particular that is the basis for the charges today. Since that time, we've had more evidence made available to the office and an opportunity to meet with additional witnesses. So, as I said earlier, I've been doing this for 24 years. I don't bring cases prior to a thorough and rigorous investigation. Now, having done so, the case has been brought.
Brad, Derek Hagan, NBC News. Your predecessor took a hard look at this case and decided not to charge it. Federal prosecutors took a hard look at this case and decided not to charge it. Do you believe you have new evidence that led you to decide to charge this, or why now?
Well, as I just mentioned, we have had available to the office additional evidence that was not in the office's possession prior to my time here. And as to your part of your question about the federal, we have a distinct and strong, I would say profound, independent interest in New York State. This is the business capital of the world. We regularly do cases involving false business statements. The bedrock, in fact, the basis for business integrity and a well-functioning business marketplace is true and accurate record keeping. That's the charge that's brought here, falsifying New York State business records.
We're going to take a few more. Yeah.
Thank you. DA Brad, I'm just going to read back one line from your statement of facts. The participants also took steps that mischaracterized for tax purposes the true nature of payments and furtherance of the scheme. You allege former President Trump was one of the participants who mischaracterized the payments for tax purposes.
I'm not going to go beyond the plain language statement of facts, which I think speaks for itself.
Shayna?
Hey, Brad, can you please comment on the strength of the evidence that Trump personally intended violating state election law, including actions that are charged in the indictment?
So the charge is falsifying business records. The charge requires, as I specified, criminal conduct that was concealed. One of the concealed crimes we allege is New York State election law. I went through in our statement of facts, which I think many of you have in front of you, goes through things including, text messages, emails, contemporaneous phone records, multiple witnesses. All of that will be, as you saw in the fall, borne out in a public courtroom in downtown Manhattan.
Our last question is Jonah.
So, yeah, Greg, the charges related to the hush money payments to Stormy Daniels, the release from your office also mentions another woman, Karen McDougal, as well as a doorman. Can you comment on how those players are related to the charges you've brought or to the case overall?
I'm glad you put your finger on that, because it's not just about one payment. It is 34 business records, 34 false statements in business records that were concealing criminal conduct. And the earlier question about New York State election law, when I talked about conspiracy to promote a candidacy by unlawful means. Those unlawful means, we allege, include the conduct set forth in the statement of facts, which is additional false statements separate and apart from the charged ones in AMI documents, planned false statements to taxing authorities. It is not just that one $130,000 wire payment. Thanks so much.
Any comment about any incitement of violence by former president?
We'll see if he takes any more questions. He does not appear to be willing to. That's Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan District Attorney today, who took the unprecedented step of criminally charging a president, former or current. This is the first time we've ever seen this in U.S. history. Obviously, you've heard that many times as we've reported on this, but it did play out this afternoon in Manhattan Criminal Court. Alvin Bragg pressed repeatedly, why now? Why these charges? He said he's been at this, a prosecutor in many different titles, capacities for 24 years, no stranger to cases that take a long time to bear out. He said, I bring them when they're ready. In breaking down why, there were 34 felony counts of falsifying business records and nothing in addition to that. He said that these are felonies and not just misdemeanors because they were meant to conceal other crimes. And he said there were two laws that I cited when pressed by reporters there. He said first was the New York State election law, which makes it a crime to have a falsified business record to help a candidacy. That would be to conceal the other crime, to help a candidacy by unlawful means. And he said secondly, federal election law contribution limits, obviously those alleged payments out to Stormy Daniels, et cetera, the two other payments mentioned in this indictment, well above contribution limits at the federal level. He said these 34 falsified business records concealed other crimes, and that essentially it speaks for itself. Now, on the question of why now, because you've heard a lot of this, particularly from Republican supporters of Donald Trump, and it's a legitimate question to ask, why now as we now gear up for another presidential election? Alvin Bragg said, and I think this is key here, and whether it bears out, this is what we'll continue to press on as reporters here moving forward. But he said there is more evidence in hand now that he is the DA than what the previous Manhattan DA had in hand. Now, whether or not that's the David Pecker of this all, the owner of the National Enquirer, or it's another piece of crucial evidence here. Again, we're going to know that in the coming days and weeks. It would seem that David Pecker is playing a significant role in this indictment, this catch and kill scheme that is laid out in great detail, the alleged catch and kill scheme that Alvin Bragg says was concealed by falsifying these business records. So Dan Abrams, Kate Shaw, first I want to get your reaction from both of you. You said he would take questions, weren't sure if he would, hoped that he would. He did. Did he adequately answer the question of why now?
Well, if he can demonstrate that there was significant additional evidence that came forward that wasn't available before, that's certainly an argument to make. Now, it's interesting to think about the timing. David Pecker went into the grand jury after Robert Costello went into the grand jury. Remember, he was an attorney who had worked with Michael Cohen, who went in and blasted Michael Cohen. The Trump team had asked him to testify. He came in and said, Michael Cohen's not credible. Can't believe anything he says. David Pecker comes in after that point to testify, to effectively rebut Michael Cohen. Did they have David Pecker in their hands before that happened? Was this a new revelation to them after? Did they start having questions about the case? These are all things we don't know the answers to, but very important questions. So we'll see. It's still a little vague here as to exactly how they're going to enhance it from a misdemeanor to a felony, and that's the single most important question here. Because if this defense team is able to somehow get the felonies eliminated, if they're able to argue that they have not made a sufficient case to elevate it to a felony, you do then get into statute of limitations problems on a misdemeanor, which is only 2 years. And there are all sorts of rules and regulations around that, but the felonies are what give you 5 years. And there are extensions beyond that. But that's a very important legal argument that is still to come in this case. Still a lot we don't know.
Yeah, and this connection, Kate, the other part of the question, not simply just why now, but how do you make falsifying business records a felony? And he says it's clear in the indictment why we've done that.
Right, we've tied it, he says, to election integrity. This scheme, this conspiracy was about essentially inducing a fraud of some sort, right? Convincing the public to vote a particular way in a presidential election. I thought Bragg actually was quite effective here. I think he was kind of addressing critics who have said, this is kind of a small bore, this isn't as important, this is hush money payments, there are other investigations that are more significant. He really struck two notes. This is about financial integrity in the financial capital of the world and election integrity in the context of a presidential election. Those are high stakes matters, and that's what he said this case is about.
And again, he tried to make the case right there, and obviously he's going to do a much more extensive job of trying to make his case than just a couple of questions from the media there, that the falsification of business records concealed another crime, which was, in his words, he's alleging here, the catch and kill scheme to protect a candidate, particularly in those final months leading up to the election. Pierre, you were talking about something else that struck a chord with you, and that's where the American people come into all this, the voters who were trying to make up their minds in an election where many believed they weren't happy with really either candidate.
I took particular note of what the district attorney said when he said, quote, this is about an effort to hide damaging information from the voting public. That's the heart of what this catch and kill scheme was about, according to the district attorney. And again, he's essentially saying that the campaign finance laws of this country, both state and federal, matter. And what the scheme was about was to create the aura that Donald Trump was a viable candidate who did not have this baggage. And the idea is that this baggage would have somehow damaged the campaign to the point where he might not have been able to win. And he's saying that Donald Trump was a direct participant with Michael Cohen and the publisher of the National Enquirer to get this done.
John Carl, what did you make of the case he made here?
Well, I mean, I think this is going to play out against a political background and a deeply divided country where a good chunk of our nation believes that this is entirely politically motivated. But, you know, he's made the case that this was an effort effectively to help his campaign and to hide the fact that it was done to help his campaign. I mean, it's going to be tough to make the case to that segment of this country, a big segment of the country, a segment not just hardcore Trump supporters, but perhaps some who don't support Trump, that this case is political.
And it's always important to remember, Terry Moran, that there were jurors before this grand jury who came up with allowing the DA to move forward with this indictment. And now there'll be jurors, if this goes to trial, who listen to this. And when you hear him describe this alleged catch and kill scheme, that's something that people can understand. It's not a leap to understand if you got something labeled one way and then you find out the money actually paid allegedly to catch and kill a story and to bury it. That would seem to be something, and we've reported on it often here, that people can at least understand. They can make their own judgment on the backside, but at least it's a scheme that it would seem they would be able to make the case and then let them decide whether or not it was a crime.
Oh, they'll understand it. I don't think there's any question about that, David, especially given the underlying tawdry facts. They'll lean in to the narrative and to the structure. The question is, can the DA prove that it is a violation of the law? And I think what we're about to embark on now is so critical in relation to what Jonathan Karl just said. Look, this is pouring gasoline on the raging fires of political polarization in this country. Alvin Bragg, the district attorney, has taken on a lot. And so how this case proceeds legally, how does he answer and get around the notion that statute of limitations has told under normal circumstances on these charges? He can. There are ways of doing it. But will that further fuel, a sense that this is a gotcha, go get 'em case, a fundamental violation of Americans' sense of fairness in how prosecution should proceed? And I do think that so much rests now on people seeing the rule of law at work. They'll have arguments at every stage. The jurors, as you point out, they'll understand the narrative, and they will have to weigh whether or not this rises to the level of criminal activity that Alvin Bragg has charged. In the John Edwards case, which while not precisely on point is similar, the jurors decided that what John Edwards did was wrong. There are a lot of wrong things you can do in an election. There are a lot of things you can try to keep from the voters to protect your position in an election that aren't criminal, and that will be the heart of this case.
Terry Moran, our thanks to you. With just a few moments left here, I want to get a few more opinions before we go off the air and push this forward to new reporting about what we could expect later tonight once the former president's back at Mar-a-Lago. But first to you, former Governor Chris Christie, former prosecutor as well. You heard Alvin Bragg. You were sitting here as part of this coverage with us. Listen, he said here that I take cases, I can bring them when they're ready. He also revealed that we had more in hand than the previous DA had. What did you make of that?
Well, on the first one, that's a standard prosecutorial line. They give that to you in the handbook when you get sworn in as a prosecutor. And so I was not surprised to hear him say that. And I don't think it has much import one way or another. On the fact that, on everything else he said, this better not be his best day. When you bring an indictment, you've got nobody pushing back against you. Nobody in the grand jury's pushing back against you. Defendants or witnesses are not allowed to have lawyers present. You get to present your case absolutely unobstructed. Well, that's not the way it's going to be from here forward. The challenge for Bragg is going to be, this better not be his best day. He better have a lot of other really good days in the courtroom. And I think one thing we've got to look to is, what else does Pecker have besides just his conversations with Trump as alleged in the indictment? Does he have documents? Does he have emails or text messages which confirm certain things? Are there possibly tape recordings? I mean, all of those are things that may in fact exist. And so we've got to see what's the quality of the proof. But for Alvin Bragg today, he better hope today wasn't his best day. He better have a lot of good days going forward, because it will now be hotly contested in the courtroom and in the court of public opinion.
No question about that. Governor Christie, our thanks to you as always. Heidi Heitkamp, what did you make of what Alvin Bragg just laid out?
Well, I think he wanted to make the point that New York is the financial capital. We bring these cases all the time. To not bring against Donald Trump would not be consistent with what we think we need to do to protect business records. And so blah, 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 right? But the real challenge here for Donald Trump is, what's next? What about the documents case in Mar-a-Lago? What about the special prosecutor? What about the case in Georgia? And so we're just one day into this on this case, but you've got to look at it kind of overall. We've been tracking a number of independents on social media in an organization that I head up, and I will tell you, looking at the indictment, since the indictment, there has been a lot of MAGA stories about this is horrible, it's all political. The independents are like, yeah, here we go again. With this guy, there's nothing but chaos, and we're tired of it. And so I think we've got to be a little careful careful because we're only one day into it. We're going to know more in a couple months on how politically people are going to react to this, and it's going to be in the context of additional investigations terminating.
There's no way, thank you, Heidi, there's no way to escape that we're in the middle of a campaign season, the race for the White House underway again. President Biden has not declared that he's running again, but he said in an interview with me that he's every intention to do so, respect her fate, but every intention to do so, and he's very much acting like the candidate out in the trail. And it was an interesting sort of split screen in the last 24 hours with him in Minneapolis talking about jobs at a manufacturing facility. Let's bring in Mary Bruce, because what was also key here, Mary, was the president addressed this for the first time, expressing his trust in the legal system and his trust in the NYPD. And they, of course, did do a good job today keeping the city and the former president safe, too.
And beyond that, David, this president really does not want to talk about this. He did weigh in briefly yesterday, as you noted, reinstating and reassuring everyone of his faith in the legal system, his faith in the NYPD to handle any unrest today. But Biden has not commented on the specifics of this, and he hasn't taken the opportunity to attack Trump in any way, which may at face value seem a bit unusual since Trump and Biden are likely, it seems, to go head to head in the next presidential race. But Biden, for one, is someone who takes very seriously the independence of the judiciary, but he also wants to draw a very clear contrast between the drama surrounding the former president and the work that the current president is doing. So this White House, instead of commenting, instead of going into a tit for tat with Donald Trump, is trying to project that Joe Biden is doing the work. They are trying to highlight his agenda this week, even though they know they certainly are going to have a very hard time getting that messaging through. For now, they are happy to have Donald Trump and the drama surrounding him soaking up much of the oxygen, David.
Mary Bruce live at the White House. Mary, thank you.